Hey everybody. I hope that you guys had a good weekend. I hope that if you wanted to watch the Super Bowl, you had an opportunity to do that. If you didn't want to watch the Super Bowl, I hope you didn't have to watch the Super Bowl. Um, it was strange this morning. I woke up and I was like, what was the event that happened yesterday? I feel like it was something, and I don't know, I was just kind of like weirdly disoriented. And then I was like, oh yeah, the Super Bowl. That's what happened yesterday. Um, so that was something that happened. Um, Now what I like to do on a day like today, which is the day before our exam, or the class period before our exam, is I just kind of like to give a rundown of what you guys should expect and what will be expected of you on an exam day. Um, so with that to say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple of example kind of um, descriptions, and I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Right now, the PowerPoint's blank, and the reason for that is I like to kind of build it out during the class period, so that everyone kind of has questions that they can ask, and I can fill in some blanks as needed. So I'm sure that there will be some as we proceed, and I'll be ready for those. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to give you guys the knowledge that exam number one. What I first like to talk about is kind of the logistics, and then I like to go on to kind of the content of the exam, and maybe some practical questions that you should expect to see. So, exam number one, Wednesday. I did post the practice exam. I'm going to make sure that I posted it. I'm like, it's it's in the quizzes. Okay, let me go ahead and practice exam number one. I can add a link to it real quick. I believe that if you follow this link, that will take you to the practice exam. Okay, so um, absolutely. So, are we allowed to use a periodic table for the exam? I will have a periodic table on the questions that need a periodic table. So don't worry about bringing one or anything like that. And sorry to, um, just yeah, do not bring one. Actually, let me rephrase that. Um, Now go. So our exam is going to be on Wednesday. That'll be February 12th. And that exam will open at, I usually like to give a little bit of an early jump on it. So I'm going to say at 10:30 a.m. So you can start it as early as 10:30 a.m. You will have 1 hour and 20 minutes. If you have added time or additional time, or if you have an accommodation for additional time, you will be granted that, or you will be kind of provided with that additional time. This paper right here, I keep in front of my desk. And just so anybody knows, the paper that I held up, I only held up the back so nobody's names. You couldn't read anyone's names. Um, I keep it on my desk so that I remember to input the added times. You'll have 1 hour and 20 minutes or additional for accommodations. I never spell the word accommodations right. Or I rarely spell it right. So thank you, Microsoft. You'll have 1 hour and 20 minutes from when you start. So what that means is that if you start your exam and you have 1 hour and 20 minutes. Let's say you started at 10:45 a.m. Add to the chat, what time will your exam conclude? Or what time will it basically close down on you? 20 minutes after 10:45 would be 11:05. An hour from then, 12:05. So closes, or ends, I'll say, at 12:05 p.m. And I'm going to go ahead and add to this hypothetical situation, situation number one. So then I put ASDF there just so I can have additional space and my bullet points are aligned. Now let's go with hypothetical situation number two. And now I'm going to jump down. And where I'm going to jump down to is I'm going to say the other constraint. The exam is due at, well, our class goes until, great question, Stanley. You will not need an access code because Proctorio enters the access code. So if you are prompted for an access code, that means Proctorio is not engaged. I'm going to repost the Proctorio practice quiz to make sure that the setup that you're using is going to work for taking this. So okay. So then your exam will be due at, our class ends at 12:20, but I always give a little bit of extra time. So I'm going to say 12:30. Yeah. So your exam is due at 12:30, but then it closes at, I'm going to call that 12:40 p.m. Okay. So, and keep in mind, if you have accommodations for additional time, I've got a kind of a slightly different setup for you. So some of this is relevant, some of this is not. Because if you have like, okay, so let's go to our hypothetical situation number two. Let's say that you start your exam at, let's just go with 11:30 a.m. You slept in and you decide that, okay, well, or you needed the extra sleep, so you decided I'm going to start my exam at 11:30. What time will your exam end? And just so we're on the same page, I'm going to until, or I'm going to say open until, okay, 12:30, close. So 12:30 is when you'll get like a notification. And I think that the exam will pop up like, hey, the exam is due at 12:30. But you will have until 12:40 p.m. So what that means is that if you start at 11:30, you'll only give yourself an hour and 10 minutes. At 12:30, you'll get a notification that, hey, the exam is due at 12:30, but this open until basically means that you can keep working on it, but then at 12:40, it shuts down completely. And I know that's a little bit confusing. That was something that was confusing for me for quite some time, and I apologize to add any sort of confusion for you guys. But basically, it gives you a little bit of a buffer. Um, so now, with that said, if you wanted to use your entire hour and 20 minutes, what is the latest time that you should start your exam? Add to the chat. 11:20. Exactly. If you wait until 12 or if you wait until 11:30, you're losing a little bit of time. Think about this as 12:30 is the time when your professor stands in the front of the room and is like, "Hey, wrap it up." But then 12:40 is the point in time where your professor has left the room. And then you're basically just left with an exam that you can't submit. Can I get a thumbs up, a chat, an emoticon, anything into the chat that, okay, I understand that. Thank you. Okay, cool. Um, so one of the questions that people ask is, what time can we start? Can we take the exam any point? These are your parameters. If you want to start at 10:30, I'll be ready for you to start at 10:30. If you want to wait until 12 p.m. to start, you can start at 12 p.m. You're going to be limited, however, on the time that you have to actually complete the exam. So that's something that I'm like, do this cautiously or do this with caution. The next thing that I wanted to add is, and keep in mind, this is kind of logistics of taking the exam. Um, I'm going to be administering, change this. So we've got our time constraints proctored. The exam is going to be proctored using the to device method. Okay. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to do ASDF so I can have another bullet point down there. But now I'm going to tab in to say, what is the to device method? The to device method utilizes two electronic devices, hence two. Your first device is going to be your laptop or desktop computer that you are going to be taking the exam on. And since you're taking the exam on this, this is the device that is going to be, and this will be logged into Proctorio. Okay, so this first device, what does it need to have? Needs a webcam and browser, and that's about it. This is the device that you're going to log in on, and you're going to be answering your questions on. Now, the second device, a good example of a second device would be a phone. I'll say phone or iPad. And this device needs to be equipped with Zoom. This logs into our Zoom, the regular meeting that we always have. And you're going to log in with this second device. Now, what are these two things doing? Proctorio will basically track your, what your computer is doing. It's the lockdown browser. It will also record any like keystrokes that you have, and it will also kind of keep the camera on you. Okay. So the second device, your phone or iPad, where? What? Huh? Let's imagine that my phone is my second device. Where would I have it positioned? I'm going to have it positioned like right here. And what this device is going to be doing is it's going to be able to give another perspective and another vantage point of what's on your screen, as well as what's in your workspace. Um, so those are the two things that you need. Now, I've had people say, well, I don't have a second device. Contact me and we'll sort something out. We'll figure it out. Um, can I get a thumbs up or a sounds good from what this consists of? Okay, cool, cool. Um, now, so will everyone be able to see our work as we are taking the exam? Fantastic question. There is a function in Zoom, or there's a setting in Zoom where basically, I can't remember exactly what it's called. It's like um, supervisor mode or something like that, where you will only see me, I will see everyone. You will see me, you will not see any of your classmates. So, if I'm holding, it would be kind of silly for me to be like, yeah, let's just everyone show each other your screens. That's not the case. So when you look into the Zoom, what you'll see is, yeah, there's like 30 participants. Um, but every like 28 of those participants will have just a black box with their name on it. Thank you very much for asking that question, because yes, that would be very silly. Like I'm 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 requiring you guys to cheat off each other. That would be a bad plan. Um, okay, next up, scratch paper. Yes, you can use it. After that, calculator. Yes, you can use it. I believe that Proctorio has a calculator. I will make sure of that. Video on for your Zoom, yes, and yes, keep it muted. Um, I will need you to, however, have your phone or whatever your second device is, have your speaker on, because I might message you at some point during the exam and say, hey, I can't see this, or hey, could you adjust this? So Zoom will be basically the mechanism that I can communicate with you, or you can communicate with me during the exam. So, you'll be able to ask a question during for that purpose. Okay, so scratch paper, yes. Calculator, yes. Next up is note card. Um, when you hear the phrase note card, or whenever I hear the phrase note card, I think, oh, it's a card with a note on it. Okay, great. Whenever I'm thinking of a note card, though, I'm thinking of like an index card, and something that would fit into one of these right here. And this just has a bunch of USB drives and a ticket to the Texas State versus Arkansas State basketball game, Thursday, February 9th, 2023. Oh, I missed the anniversary yesterday. Um, but just a second. Let me get to that in just a second. Um, so an index card or a note card, yes. Now, question, are we able to take it in a common area in the library? Yes, you are. Um, I would kind of, you know, be selective with that. Um, it's no problem for me if there's people walking around you, sorry, but I personally have ADHD, and if I have people around me, then all of a sudden those people around me start to drive me crazy, and then I'm like, oh, I can't think at all. All I can think about is hearing that one person's cowboy boots clicking against the ground, and I can't focus. So I would just be selective and careful about where you actually take it. Make sure that, you can position the zoom so that I can see your screen and see stuff like that. Um, so kind of I guess I would do like a, stake the joint and case it or sorry, case the joint and be like, okay, if I took it at Mochas and Javas, as long as no one's at that table, I'm good. I'm thinking of that table right now. But, our class starts close to lunchtime, so you might have a little bit of a rush there. Now, as a follow-up to that, one thing that's a little bit of a misconception about Proctorio is Proctorio has no influence on your grade. What I get, so what Proctorio is doing is, like I said, it's kind of monitoring your keystrokes, what pops up on your screen and stuff like that. Um, Proctorio does not assign your grade. Proctorio gives me a score, and it says, I'm going to be both the student and the instructor here. I'll log into Proctorio, I'll log into Canvas. Sorry, I'll log into Canvas and then into Proctorio, and it will give me a report. It will say, Joel had a, I think they call it like a suspicion score of 0. And then I'll be like, okay, what that means that there was no activity during that exam time that could be flagged for like this is suspicious. Um, if, however, I'm taking my exam at Mochas and Javas, there's going to be lots of people talking. Proctorio does need access to your microphone. And so if you're taking your exam at Mochas and Javas or something like that, then Proctorio is going to notify me and it's going to give a suspicion score of 100. And I'm going to be like, hmm. And what I do in that situation is I look at that video and I scrub through it, and there will be times whenever the microphone picks up lots of audio. And I'll look at it and I'll be like, okay, I want to watch the video for that time. And I'll look at it and I'll be like, yeah, it picks up audio, but the people next, it seems like that person was taking their exam at Mochas and Javas, and the people next to them were having a conversation. That has no impact on your grade. Instead, that's just like hey, something, for lack of a better phrase, something fishy's going on, so you might want to check it out. And I check it out. I look at the video and then I'm like, well, nothing really suspicious here. So Proctorio is never going to say something suspicious was happening. Hey, Joel, that person deserves a 0. Does that make sense? Can I get a thumbs up or a yes if the functioning of Proctorio makes sense to you guys? Okay, awesome. Um, so now let me get back to the note card. I am going to refer to this as your supporting document or your reference doc. And what I mean by that is on this note card, which I'm going to give you kind of specific details, 3 by 5. This is 3 inches by 5 inches. Um, if you have some index cards or note cards, then you can just use one of those. There are some that are, I think there's two different sizes, like 3 by 5 or 4 by 7. Um, the 3 by 5 index card, that's the size that I want you to use. Um, you're not permitted to use anything larger than that. In the event that you don't have index cards, a fair question is, well, could I just write on a piece of paper that's 3 inches by 5 inches? Yes. A follow-up question to that is, do I have to write on it? Nope. Can you type all your thoughts and then print them out onto that 3 inch by 5 inch piece of paper? Yes, you absolutely can. I have no problem with that. Um, at some point during the exam, I will ask you to show your index card, which is one of the other reasons for the Zoom. I'll look at your index card and I'll be like, okay, cool, checks out. Um, so I'm going to add here index card or piece of paper. I like the index cards because the thickness of the paper is a little bit more than just a piece of printer paper. So it's a little bit thicker. So um, it kind of stands up like it's less likely to just kind of drift away and float away. I don't think anyone's going to be taking their exam at the beach or anything like that. So they're expecting gusts of wind or anything. Um, but that's what you got. Now, I'm referring to this as a supporting doc or reference. Ooh, great question. Both sides. Fine. You can write on both sides of it. I've seen people do this where they print up something, they type all the notes that they need, grab any figures that they need, make it a 3 inch by 5 inch piece or item, print that up, and then get a glue stick and slap it to another piece of paper that exact same size. Can we print out diagrams from class? Yes, you can. Absolutely. We can write anything on them? Absolutely. If you want to write something like, go get them. You're awesome. Positive affirmations, go for it. I don't think you need to do that because I know that you're awesome. And you guys know that you're awesome, but it never hurts to have that on there. So you can write on both sides. You can write whatever you want on there. Printing, it's fine. Writing, it's fine. There's kind of no limitations. Um, so that's the note card. Um, the with respect to the note card, the one thing that I would kind of, I don't know if I would say caution you about, um, I would just try to play it a little bit conservatively and be like, what is the information that I, need to have and do is kind of like try to figure out where your knowledge stops and what you need to fill that in with. Um, Honestly, from my experience, whenever I had this a couple of times as a graduate student and as an undergraduate. Um, I always found that whenever I was writing stuff on there, it's like I tricked myself into prioritizing that information. And it's like I was writing something, and then all of a sudden, when the exam came around, I was like, why did I write this down? Because I know it. And so it's almost like, to me, it's almost a good study tool, just writing things out and being explicit. Like, this is important information. You kind of subconsciously learn it. But I'm not going to say, oh, yeah, that's absolutely what happens. That's just kind of anecdotally. That's what I've experienced. Um, you can write, you can print, you can draw, whatever on both sides of that paper. It's good to go. Okay, so the logistics are we've got the time that it starts, the time that it closes. We've got our two device proctoring method. Um, I'm guessing there are no quizzes or assignments for this week. Chris, or sorry, that is a great question. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Um, and then you've got your note card, calculator. I do have to check about if Proctorio has a calculator. I believe that it does. Scratch paper, yeah, you can use scratch paper. You can have Sharpies. You can have. I had a student in one of my other classes ask if they could use a whiteboard. Fine. I'm thinking when somebody says a whiteboard, they mean something that's like it can fit in their in front of themselves, as opposed to something where it's like, oh, I've got this on my wall. I've got to turn around. Um, if you want, that's fine. It's just closed notes, but your note card slash supporting doc, reference doc is for you to use. I got a question. I'm guessing there aren't any quizzes or assignments for this week, just exam one. Great question. I'm actually going to post two quizzes. Now, these quizzes are kind of more surveys, so it's really completion more than anything else. And they are one to be done before the exam and then one to be done after the exam. So they're really just like short answers. What are you doing in order to prepare for the exam? And, how are you feeling about the exam? Where would you put your kind of comfort level on like a scale of 1 to 5? And then after the fact, it will be, well, how do you feel about how you did? And is there anything that you would change about your study to like that you think you could improve on? But those are going to be graded just like any other quiz. And if you're, there isn't really a right or wrong answer for any of those questions. One of them, sorry, one of them will be posted later this afternoon, and the other one will be posted after our exam. So mid-afternoon on Wednesday. The one that is posted today, please finish it before the exam. And then the other one, finish it by the end of the week. So it is a little bit of a shorter time frame, but it's kind of different because it's not really content. Okay, great question. Do we get immediate grades like on the quizzes? Um, you will get your scores. I always like to give like about 2 hours of a delay before I release the exam scores. So your exam scores will be available probably 2 p.m. on Wednesday. Um, so I'll get you feedback there. Oh, and then related to today, There aren't any poll questions. I'm just going to evaluate participation based on, are you in the Zoom? And then well, yeah, today is just going to be freebie. And then Wednesday, everyone gets freebie as well. Okay. So we've got awesome questions. Thank you guys very much. Um, in terms of like my opinion, what are things that would be worthwhile to write on? I'm going to go down here. I'm going to call this note card coaching. So what are good things to put onto your note card? Or I'll say review doc. No, I'm going to say note card slash review doc coaching. Um, what I would say are functional groups. And suffixes. If you remember, I mentioned that uh, I'll say functional groups and prefixes, suffixes. I mentioned with the prefixes, I put this in parentheses, 1 to 10. So 1 to 10 would be something like, could I ask you about how many carbons are in a molecule with the prefix or the stem non, non? Yeah, that would be fair. That's a fair question to ask. Um, what I would do when it comes to prefixes is think about the ones that you maybe struggle with, the ones that are a little bit unfamiliar with. Um, from my experience, pentane, people don't struggle with that. Great job, Stanley. Pentane, hexane, heptane, octane, nonane, and decane. Basically, from 5 to 10, people don't struggle with those quite so often because of the fact that those are things that they've kind of seen those prefixes before when they talk about shapes. So, you know what an octagon is? Well, that's where two guys get in and start fighting each other. Um, so there's some familiarity and some context that you can kind of fall back on there. So what I would do is I'd be like, okay, meth, eth, oh, is it prop or is it bute? Which one is it? Which one's four? Meth is one, eth is two. Oh man. And so I would sort that out. I would write those down. And then for suffixes, what I would do is I would just write in, or here's what I like to do. Um, give myself a, now I'm going to give my bullet point. I'll say ETH, or not ETH, ENE. Oh man. And then I'm going to put an equal sign because ENE indicates a double bond. Um, so I would throw some prefixes, suffixes, functional groups, and go from there. What I would also include amino acids. Well, what do we talk about with respect to amino acids? We talked about their classification. We talked about there were basically five structures that I want you to know and be able to identify and be able to transition between single letter and three-letter codes. Um, those would be D, E, um, let's see, H, K, and R. Well, what are all those? That's aspartic acid, so ASP. Um, E is GLU for glutamic acid. H is HIS. K is LYS for lysine. And R is ARG. So that gives me my one letter and my three letter codes of these different amino acids. Then I would think about what do those different groups, or what are those different groups? And I'd include things like, okay, well, this is negative. This is negative. Histidine is positive. Lysine is positive. And then arginine is also positive. So just in that one quick line, basically got a couple of different questions there. Or I've got quick references for what I know, I as the person who's writing the exam, know are some questions that you're going to be asked. Um, so those are kind of good things to put. And then one other thing that's worth considering and worth remembering is we talked about functional groups, but then we also talked about like bond polarity and classifications of bonds. So I would go back and grab some of those definitions. Um, Now, with that in mind, um, I have a class right before you guys. It's a 1310 section, and one of my students asked me, "Well, is the practice exam just like the actual exam?" Or sorry, they said, "Is it identical?" And my answer to that is no. The exams are not identical. The practice exam is a practice. So, what I mean by that is, let's say hypothetically you had a practice exam question, I'll say PEQ1, practice exam question number one. And let's say that this question was, which amino acid is the N-terminal amino acid in the peptide um, KRDE? Okay. So in order to answer that question, you would have to think about like the structure of a peptide. And if you want to answer to the chat, by all means, go for it. For this one, we've got KRDE. So that's a tetrapeptide. And this question could be your answer options might be ARG, GLN, just to throw a little curveball at you, GLU, ASP, and LYS. It could be that. It could also be presented as their full names or their single letter codes. Um, so to answer this, though, what do you have to do? Think about the process. You've got to know what a peptide looks like. Then you've got to know what the N terminus of a peptide is. Peptides are read left to right, just like we read a book. The difference is that we go, well, N termini to C termini. So if I ask the N terminal amino acid in this peptide, well, it's going to be lysine, LYS. Great job. So in peptides, are they always in the order you make them in, like they don't rearrange it? Fantastic question. We always look at peptides going N termini to C termini. Now, your question is awesome because it kind of opens up a more complex question that we're going to get into when we talk about protein folding. But anytime we look at a peptide, it's always read N termini to C termini. So there's no mix up there. I apologize for any confusion, but that's the way that we do it. We always read N termini to C termini. Absolutely. Um, so this is I'm going to go ahead and highlight this one. This would be our practice exam question. Now I'm going to go ahead and go over here. AE Q1. So AE for actual exam. And I'm going to change it. Which amino acid is the C terminal amino acid peptide? And let's go with RKE. Okay, so when we think about what was the last question asking about, and we'll go ahead and say none of these answers are correct. The question is invalid. It has no C termini. Glutamic acid, lysine, OS, a K, ARG, and asparagine. Okay. So I'm throwing a couple of different answer options at you. Um, what is at the heart of this question is, do you understand what the direction that you look at a peptide sequence? That's the heart of this question. Then a next layer to make it kind of a more challenging question. The next layer is, okay, well, can you translate that RKE into something more meaningful that we're looking for? What does what does R stand for? What does K stand for? What does E stand for? Now, I think most folks are going to see this question. You're absolutely right. They're going to see this and they're going to say, okay, well, terminal. Okay, that's an end. Well, this looks like it has two ends, R and E. Okay. Well, then when you arrive at that, you're basically looking at the answer options and you're going to say, what is E? Well, E is it's a single letter code for an amino acid. What is R? That's a single letter code for an amino acid. And basically, I'd want you to arrive at ARG or glutamic acid. Those are the best two answers because they both align with ends of these peptides. Now, the correct answer is glutamic acid. So that would be the sort of question that I could ask about um, ends of a polypeptide. Um, I don't understand peptides. Okay, well, I'll come back to that in just a moment. But my question is, does anyone have any kind of general questions about, oh, actually, you know what I need to do? I need to tell you, sorry, I need to jog back because I went into this review doc coaching and now I'm going to go back here and I'm going to tell you a little bit of details about the exam. So you have an hour and 20 minutes, 40 questions. And those 40 questions are going to be about, I think, probably 35 to 38 multiple choice. And then two or as few as two, but as many as five are multiple select questions. So those multiple select questions would be like select all of the true statements below. Um, and the difference that you will see is that the difference that you'll see when it comes to um, your answers for the multiple select questions, go to the draw function. What you'll see is, oh, sorry, everyone. Oh, there we go. For multiple select, multiple choice will look like this. You'll have your different answer options. Multiple select. If I remember correctly, it will have a box or it will have boxes. And for a multiple choice question, if you mark this one and then you change your answer and you mark this one, what happens is that first one that you selected no longer will have an X through it. Whereas multiple select, if you click this one and then you click this one, they will both remain engaged. And so they will both have that selection. And so what that means is that, if you think, okay, well, it's both of these. Answer three, answer four. Let's say that you get to a multiple select question and you read through it and you're like, what do I think? You know what I think? I think it's answers three and four. And then before you proceed to the next question, you have a second thought and you're like, ooh, never mind. I think that it's one and three. Make sure that you deselect answer number four. Because if you do not deselect answer number four, well, then you will get that marked against you. Now, the way that multiple select questions are graded, just so we're all on the same page, all of the multiple select questions will have at least two answers. Let me write at least two correct statements or correct answers. And think about it as if there are two questions or if there are two answers, you get half credit for each. So to get full credit, you have to select both of them. And let's say that I'm going to put a check mark by the right ones. So where I put these check marks and where I put those black markings, um, add to the chat what credit someone would get for marking that right there. The red checks indicate the correct answer. The black marks indicate um, the correct answers as well, or the selections made by the person. So what credit, add to the chat, would somebody get for that multiple select entry? Full marks. Perfect. Okay, so if it was worth 1 point, they'd get 1 point. Now, um, with that, add to the chat, I'm marking in black what credit you would get for this. Close, close. So if there are two right answers and this person selected both of those right answers, great. But then they selected this one. This is a wrong answer. This one right here basically negates one of the correct answers. I always kind of think about it as um, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So for these markings right here, that person would get half credit because one right answer is canceled out by one wrong answer. Now, with that in mind, what credit would somebody get for this right here? Perfect. They would get no credit for that right there. Okay. So when there's a multiple select question, be careful with the responses that you get or that you give. I did have a student years ago who I had, like 4 or 5 questions, and they marked every single answer. And they said, well, I marked the right answers. And I said, yes, you did. But you also marked 2 incorrect answers. Okay, so what about a question with 3 right answers? They select 2 correct and pick. Okay, that's a great question. I am about 99% sure on this. Let me go ahead and erase that. Let's say, okay. Um, okay, so we've got check, check, and then X. Okay, so a situation like this right here. Okay. If I remember correctly, so the way that I always kind of think about this is you had, I need a little bit more space to write. You've got basically 0.3 points. It's 0.33, it's 33% points per right answer. So this one right here, this one right here, and this one right here. They're all worth 0.3 points. So the two X's here and here, that would get you to 0.66. So 66% of the possible credit. This one right here cancels out one of those. So if you had a answer combination like this, you would get basically 33% of the possible credit. To be completely honest with you, um, I typically pick, maybe I'm uncreative or not creative, but just it's much more simple and straightforward for me to go with 2 right answers. So that's typically what I do. Um, sorry, I kind of showed my poker hand there. Um, but that's how Canvas does the processing. Or that's how their gradebook is set up to process that. Um, does that make sense, Chris? Okay, cool. All right. So, does anyone have any questions about the exam itself? You have 80 minutes, so that's about 2 minutes per question. I appreciate the follow-up there, Chris. For a second, I thought, yeah, you were yelling at me. I apologize. I apologize for thinking. Anyway, um, you have 80 minutes. When can you start it and still have your full hour and 20 minutes? The latest would be about 11:20. Um, you'll be able to start as early as 10:30 though. So if you want to start at 10:30, great. The exam scores will be posted sometime mid-afternoon on Wednesday. And you'll be able to see the answers that you got right, as well as the answers that you got incorrect. Um, how would you use your practice exam to study for the exam? Well, I would go through those questions and, um, you know, make sure I understand them because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those and kind of translate them almost, like change some of the details and then write a new question. Um, the practice exam, I think, is probably your best resource to look for or look at. Um, and then, on our Canvas page, there's also those daily links for, what did we cover that day. I think that's a good thing to look at. Or those are good kind of write-ups. And if you're unfamiliar with those, I wanted to show that on our Canvas page. Here we go. Because it's a lot to ask. Like I've got this recording is going to be posted just like all the other ones. But these day summaries, I've got those, and it's just kind of a good rundown of like what do we talk about. Um, so if you're thinking like what could I what are some things that I would maybe want to put on my note card? And am I sharing my browser? Good, okay, good. Um, these would be good things to put there. Um, so like a carboxylic acid plus an amine, what does that make? That makes an amide. Aromatic compounds and esters have flavors and odors. Um, then little study suggestions. So just some thoughts there. Um, okay, so yeah, I know you explained it earlier, but what were we? Great question. Um, your phones, think about it as like being here. Um, and what people typically do is they have their, from my observation of this, is they usually have their computer um, next to a wall. And so they'll, stack up a book or something like that and position their phone like this, and that's going to be good. Um, in the event that I need you to like move your phone or something like that, I'll send you a message in Zoom, which is one of the reasons that I want you to have Zoom so I can communicate with you, you can communicate with me. Um, if you have any questions about anything, then also make sure that your device is charged, both of them for that matter, just because that's kind of that can be a problem. And then the last thing is if you've ever taken an exam with Proctorio, um, it has this function that asks you to like scan the room. And so what people typically do is they'll pick up their laptop and just kind of rotate it like that so that I can get a shot of your entire working space. That's a function that I believe can be disengaged and turned off. So I'm going to look into that. I typically it's like a default setting, but I believe I can turn that off. If anyone is taking their exam at the testing center, I do need to know, because then, and I think that everyone who is, I've already communicated with. Um, but that's something like there's just some other things that I need to work out. Um, yeah, so your phones are basically just going to be positioned so that I can kind of see your workspace in front of you, and then if you can get your screen in there, great. But really, the workspace is the biggest thing. Um, does that answer your question, Riley? Does that help? Sorry. Okay, cool. Um, Okay, so now I wanted to come back because there's questions about peptides. And I am going to draw a peptide and talk about what a peptide is. Um, and if anyone wants to hang around, by all means, but if you need to take off or something like that, cool. Um, I wanted to also say thank you guys very much for this class. I really appreciate the effort that you guys are putting in and coming to class and answering questions. It makes my experience a whole lot better. I know that not necessarily like, oh, thank goodness that we've made Joel's experience better. But it helps me, kind of be a better instructor, and I hope that I am being a good instructor for you. Um, so if you have any questions between now and your exam, please email me. If it's like a issue with could I start it a little bit earlier? I think we could probably work something out. Um, just email me and we'll sort that out. If you need to go, have a good one. If you got questions, you want to hang around for a little bit, stay. Okay. So, oh, and have a good rest of your day. I'll have office hours at 12:30. Follow the link. Might be a little bit late depending on how our questions go in here. Okay, folks. So I'm going to keep the recording going. Um, and if anyone wants to add to the chat and ask a question, go for it. So peptides. Peptides are kind of, they are also known as polymers of amino acids. So peptides have a biological function, um, in that they can stimulate cells within your body to do certain things. Um, for instance, there's if you do a Google search for peptides right now, what you'll probably find a lot of are like performance enhancing peptides. Peptides are a big part of like bodybuilding and endurance sports. Um, but what they are is they are polymers of amino acids. So they're kind of like I always think of amino acids as like bricks. A peptide is a chain of amino acid bricks that's put together. So let's say lysine, arginine. I'll go with histidine, and I'll stop it at aspartic acid. So this would be a chain made up of four different amino acids. Now, there's a connection between this and how we've talked about functional groups. So, what does a lysine amino acid backbone look like? Looks like this: N, C, C. This N is going to be H3 plus. The next carbon is also known as our alpha carbon. Looks like that. And then the last carbon looks like this. That's a carboxylic acid. I'm going to draw down here. I'll just put an R because that would be where my lysine side chain is going to be. So this carboxylic acid right here, or this carboxyl functional group, it is going to react, or there's going to be a chemical reaction between the NCC is, let me, a nitrogen atom. Then this is a carbon. And then this right here is another carbon. And that carbon, so they all have the exact same backbone, right? Yes. And is that considered a functional group itself? fantastic question. Um, I would say that it is not considered, the backbone's not considered a functional group because of the fact that it's two groups connected by this what's known as our alpha carbon. It's two functional groups attached to one another. Um, or are the R groups just the functional groups? The R groups are, when we talk about amino acids, the R groups are kind of the important functional groups because of the fact that these this carboxyl group that I just drew on the far right is going to react with, and I'm going to change colors to draw now. So this is lysine, NH3 plus. Yes, I am going to post these slides and I am going to kind of record my writings here. So I will be posting these later today. HCOH. And then again, I'm going to draw my R group. So um, are the function, I'm responding to a private message, or are the R groups the functional groups? Sorry, I think I'm confused on the functional group and parts of the amino acid. Thank you. So the, let me go back to, okay. So the groups that I've highlighted or put a box around in black and orange, those two groups are going to undergo a chemical reaction with one another. That's a carboxyl functional group and an amino functional group. Now, I'm going to remove identifying nitrogen, carbon, and carbon. And what I'm going to show you is the result from this. What results from this is going to be, I'm going to draw in black, NH3 plus CHR. And now I'm drawing my carbon that's on the right-hand side of my lysine, but something's going to change. So same for all peptides. Yes. Great question, Stanley. That is a fantastic question. Now, what's going to change is that in my carboxyl group, I'm still going to have a carbonyl carbon. Now I'm going to switch colors to, let's pick something kind of in the middle. I'm going to go with a purple. That purple line that I just drew is a single bond. And that single bond going from my carbon to my NH, and now I'm going to go on to make the rest of my backbone for the arginine there. And it's kind of subtle, but I can zoom in. Okay, that's better. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, that's what I was going for. Okay. Um, Add to the chat if you can see the purple line that I'm referencing. Okay, that purple line, that specific line right there is what is known as my peptide bond. And I'm going to switch my color and I'm going to switch to purple because I use that. This is my peptide bond. Okay, so that's my peptide bond. Now, what I want you to notice about this is that when you look at this peptide bond, this R group right here was supposed to be a lysine. And this R group, the red R group is my arginine. The black R group is the lysine. The red R group is my arginine. Now, when you look at this molecule, I would like you to add to the chat A, B, C, or D. Add to the chat with a single letter, A, B, C, or D. Which do you think is closest to the N termini of my peptide, of my dipeptide here? So when we look at these different options, we've got A, B, C, and D. So those four different options, we're looking at the N termini. So termini, or terminal, meaning end. N, in this case, is referencing nitrogen. So this is asking basically, which end of this molecule has the nitrogen? Or which letter? A is my N termini. Now, between these different answers, we've got A, B, C, and D. So one thing about these is that A and C are both by a nitrogen. D and B, which atoms are they closest to? Well, B looks like it's closer to a carbon or a hydrogen. D looks like it's closest to our oxygen or a carbonyl oxygen. But if my question is, which is the N termini of my peptide, and I'm going to draw really big, but then I'm going to erase it, of my peptide is this whole thing. So considering all of that whole thing, my best answer for this is going to be A. Now, if I were to change the question and say, all right, well, I've put this molecule together, which A, B, C, or D is nearest to my peptide bond? Well, okay, my peptide bond. My peptide bond is in purple. A, that's a free nitrogen. That's our N termini. So that's kind of out. D is, well, that's a carbonyl oxygen. But my question for you guys is, does this, so that D right there is next to a carboxyl group. But does that carboxyl group connect to a nitrogen? No, there isn't one there. So in that case, D is out because there's no connection. Then we've got B and C. Okay, well, if I were looking at this and I was saying, all right, well, which is B closest to? B is closest to this bond or this bond. C is closest to, well, it's kind of closest to this bond or this bond. I think that this is probably not the exact question that you'd see on an exam. You'd probably see something like C is right here. Um, and this C is my answer option. That's why it's circled. So which one of these is closest to your peptide bond? C is your best answer there. So when it comes to, so let me say that when it comes to a peptide, the important things to understand are your termini, your ends, the N end or the C end. If you see an N, think N termini. If you see a carbon, think C termini. Because when you look at this whole molecule, what I want you guys to be able to identify is, well, what are the ends of it? I think everyone would agree where I'm drawing my stars here. Those are, or I want you to look at this sort of molecule and say like, okay, where those stars are, those are my ends of this molecule. Now, between those two, your N termini, yeah, it's pretty much always going to be drawn on the left. So that's why we use this, the kind of convention is reading left to right, N termini to C termini. Think about the way that you read a sentence. You read it from the left side to the right side. And I know that that's not completely unique to English, but I know in some other languages you don't read it left to right. But that's the way that we read a peptide, N termini to C termini. And I think that it's helpful to try to think of like terminals or terminal. So N terminal or C terminal. It's helpful if you've ever flown in from an airport like the Houston airport or something like that. The terminal is where you get on the plane and leave. So it's important to be able to identify those things and then be able to piece together, well, where is my N termini? Where is my C termini? Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, well, if there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop my recording.